Hi guys. So in this video, I will be explaining you what all questions has been asked to me in EPAM interview. Okay. So the EPAM interview has happened like long time back, around 3-4 months back. So at that point of time, actually, I didn't able to put up that video in the YouTube. So today I've made a customized PPT for you, like what all set of questions that has been asked to me, and I will be sharing with you across. Okay. So let me share my screen and let me show you what all question has been asked to me and what all things you should be prepared with before actually going for EPAM interview. Okay, so let's get started. I hope you can see my screen now. The first question will be always about a project, like what all projects have you worked upon? What all functionalities have you implemented? Have you worked upon change request or have you worked end to end? And what all tech stacks have you made use of? What all mappings have you made use of? What all cloud technologies have you made use of? So these type of questions can be ingrained, basically focusing upon actual project work which you have done. So you should be very much prepared well with what all sort of things you have actually done with your project from end to end. So they will ask you like each and everything in details. Okay, so you should be very much prepared for that. Next will be, have you worked on resolving bugs and migration related problems? So I have worked upon migration part basically in one of the client for EY. So that I have explained. So you can explain as per your project what all things you have implemented in your past companies. So maybe you have worked about towards resolving issues. You might be you have worked towards involvement of change request, like client has suggested to make some change, to make some code changes in a form of enhancements to the existing code. So that also you can tell. Okay, or maybe you have done a migration in your current project, like from another type of language to let's suppose Java, or from monolithic to microservice. Any kind of migration it may happen. So you can tell based upon that, like exactly what migration work you have done. So you can explain it to that. Okay. Then the question was like, which version of Spring Boot have you used in your project? Okay, so this will be the most commonly asked questions. Okay, so you should be very much well aware of like what all versions of have you used, only with not only with respect to Java, but also with respect to Maven, with respect to your cloud technologies, with respect to Spring Boot, with respect to microservices. Each and everything you should be well versed with, like which versions you are using, why you are using, and the compatibility. Like with Spring Boot 3.0, it will support only Java 17 and above, not below that. And if you are doing if you are working upon Spring Boot 2.x, for that it will support Java 11. You should be very much aware like which Spring Boot version will support which Java version. So next question will be, which minimum Java version is supported in Spring Boot 3? So I've already told you Spring Boot 3 supports Java 17 as the minimum features. Okay, minimum version of Java. Next was, what changes came with Java 17? If you tell that I have worked with Spring Boot 3, then they will ask you next question, like you might have worked with Java 17 as well. So what all new features came in Java 17 which you have implemented in your project along with Spring Boot 3? So there are multiple things that came with Java 17, like record came, sealed classes came, okay, text blocks came, then switch expression, there were lambda expression that has been involved with switch cases. So that also you can tell, like multiple cases you can have with comma separated values, that also you can have. Then pattern matching with instance of, these are the most common changes came with Java 17. Then with respect to garbage collector, there were some improvements came. So there were like G1 return committed memory. So there were removal of concurrent mark and sweep algorithm. So there were certain features that were there in Java 8 and 9 that were deprecated and that were completely removed in Java 17. Okay, so those all things you should be very much aware of, like what all things has been deprecated and removed completely from Java 17. Okay, so there were some API improvement and changes as well, like helpful null pointer exceptions. There were JRE event streaming as well. Okay, JFR event streaming. Okay, there were removal of Nashon JavaScript engine. So Nashon JavaScript engine came with Java 9, but it didn't went well. Basically, people were not using that much. So it also gets removed from Java 17. So these all things you should be aware of basically. Okay. Next question was, how will you help your teammates to gain the knowledge? Okay, so maybe you have worked on your project from past 1 year, 1.5 years. So let's suppose you want to move to a different project, or you are resigning from the current organization and you want to move to different company altogether. Then how will you give KT to your teammates? Okay, let's suppose some new team members came in your project. Then how will you guide them? Like what all tech stacks have been currently in use in your project? What all Spring Boot versions have been used? What is the flow end to end? What's the business functionality? What's the technical functionality? How will you help your teammates to gain the knowledge? So this type of question can also be asked. Okay, it's a form of behavior kind questions, like how will you help your teammates? Okay, so there your leadership qualities will be checked upon, like what all exact skills you are having, how will you guide your students, your teammates, these kind of skills also they will check. Okay, so here you can tell you, like you can create a PPT, or you can create a recorded video, or a document kind of thing for initial people, those who are those who have just joined your team, so that they can get a fair idea like what all tech stacks have been currently in use, and what is the initial procedures that you have to do before actually getting started with a project, so that you have to prepare for newcomers. Okay, so these are the things that you can explain. Next set of question was why Jakarta came into picture when JavaX was already there. So you might be working with entity layers in Spring Boot. So you might have made use of importing javax.persistence packages, that library files. Okay. So for entity, for tables, for those type of classes, it will be mainly present in JavaX or persistence. But after Java 17, basically, Jakarta came into picture. So why Jakarta came into picture? Okay, I want you to search based upon that, like why Jakarta came into picture. So it's basically dealing with Oracle. Okay, so Oracle has a trademark on Java. So that's why Oracle told like you can't use Java as a trademark language, because Oracle has its own trademark on that. So that's why the name has been changed to Jakarta. Okay, so you can do much more research on that. I can't go in depth in it in this video. So this was one of the questions. Next was the use of Spring JPA. What is the use and advantages of Spring JPA? Okay, so that also can be asked to you. So it will run internal Hibernate queries. Okay, it will be helpful in caching mechanism. Okay, so Spring JPA is a little bit slower as compared to native queries which you use in MySQL, because it interacts directly with database. But in Spring JPA, what is the advantage? You cannot focus only on one of the SQL. So let's suppose in later point of time you might want to change the SQL from let's suppose Oracle SQL to MySQL or MongoDB or any other kind of DB. In that scenario, it will create an issue if we are making use of native queries. Okay, so that's why Spring JPA is preferred, where internally it will make use of Hibernate query. So it will be independent of actually what databases you are selecting. Okay, so that's why Spring JPA is much more beneficial in that point at that point of time. Okay. So they can ask questions based upon the difference between Hibernate and Spring JPA. So you can tell like Spring JPA is a specification and Hibernate is a ORM framework tool. Okay, so JPA is a kind of specification where implementation internally is being given by Hibernate. Okay, so these are the things that you can explain. The next question will be lazy versus eager initialization. What's the difference between the two? So you might have been using it in your entity layer with the ID class basically. So you can provide like fetch type. What will be the fetch type? Fetch type will be eager or fetch type will be lazy. So based upon that, it will initialize the object at runtime. Okay, so if you are putting it as eager initialization, then as soon as you run the Tomcat server, it will initialize all the objects, whether you need it or not. It will not be worrying about. Okay, it will create the object for you. Okay, but in lazy initialization, what will happen? Whenever you need the object, at that point of time only object will be created, and before that object will not be created. Okay, so that's why in most of the cases, in most of the company and in projects, lazy initialization is preferred, because why we should create objects unnecessarily if it is not required? Okay, so that should be always initialized. Objects should be always initialized lazily. Okay, so how will you prepare that lazy initialized objects? That you have to work upon it. Okay, that you have to go through it. Next will be difference between controller and REST controller. This is a very commonly asked question you might be knowing. So REST controller contains response body, and controller contains only the dispatcher servlet part, like from which endpoint it will redirect. Okay, when the UI hits the particular request being sent from the UI. Okay, so it will actually bind the request with the body. Okay, so these are the things that you can tell. Then how to create our own singleton class and how will it work in multi-threaded environment? And they have asked to implement the same. Okay, they will ask you to implement a singleton design pattern. So how will you do that? So you can explain like what is singleton class and how will you create a singleton class, like private constructor you have to create. Okay, then after that, what you can do, you can create your own public static method. Okay, you can have a private static reference. Then you can do double check locking concept for multi-threaded environment. Then volatile keyword needs to be used with a field reference, because the change, the visibility needs to be guaranteed across all the threads that has been working parallelly. Okay, so in multi-threaded, how you can create a singleton class, that also is very much important. So I've already prepared a video of that of singleton in 2 parts. You can go through that. You will get a fair idea on that, like how singleton class is helpful, how will you break the singleton design pattern, and how will you remake it again. So those kind of things already has been discussed. So you can go through my previous videos on Singleton, you will get an idea on it. The next question will be, how will you validate a request and handle custom exceptions for the requirement? So any project requirement will come, like client will give you certain set of requirements. So there will be a validation in any project, in any work which you are doing. So you should be knowing well versed with like how will you validate the input request. Okay, so there will be added valid annotations will be there that we have to apply. Then any request is coming, you need to check whether if it is of string type, then if it is, it should not be blank, it should not be not null or empty. So those kind of things you will have to check. Okay, you have to check basically the request, what all requests are coming is a valid request or not. Then you need to have a custom exceptions. Okay, so there can be certain exceptions which is customized as per your project. So you have to know how to create that custom exception and how to throw that from your actual business layer. Okay, so how to do those things, that you have to explain over there. Okay, you can tell about REST controller advice. They can ask based upon that, how will you create your own custom exception? Then how will you add that exception in REST controller advice? Then for each method for exception, you can have a direct exception handler. Okay, so then you can throw it from that REST controller advice methods. So these all things basically you have to tell about. Then next question was difference between dependency injection and inversion of control. So I will give it to you. I will not tell the answer of this. So you should be able to answer it very properly. Like dependency injection is injecting the dependency at runtime, but inversion of control is actually inverting the control to Spring container where we are not creating an object. So you have to do deep dive on it and you have to do some research on it. Okay. Next set of questions will be, what are the types of dependency injections? Like there are multiple types of dependency injection, like setter injection, constructor injection, field injection. So field injection, we are not much preferred. Okay. Setter and constructor injections are most preferred. And out of that, which ones should I prefer? Setter or constructor? Okay. So that we have to have a think of it. So if it's already known that like all the fields needs to be made use of, then you should go for constructor injection. If like few of the properties needs to be set, others are not required to be set, like it's optional, then you should go for setter injection. So you should know about this setter and constructor injection. How will you make a constructor injection? What all things you have to do to make setter injection or constructor injection over a field? So that all thing they can tell you to implement it practically. Okay, so you should be prepared for that. Next was, what's a dispatcher servlet or front-end controller? That also is a very important question. Like whenever there is a request coming from UI, from front-end side, so directly it will not hit your endpoint, right? Or will it directly hit your endpoint? No, it will not directly hit the endpoint. First and foremost thing, it will go to your front-end dispatcher servlet. Okay, like whatever request is coming, it will be going through API gateway, then it will be going through a front-end dispatcher servlet. From there, actually, it will redirect to a particular endpoint, which one is load balanced. Okay, so it will check like which microservice instance is up, and it is not that heavy, so it will redirect that to that particular endpoint, and it will check the particular request URL. So from wherever part it is mapping, it will send a request to that particular endpoint. So this is very important dispatcher servlet. Okay, I hope you got a clarity on this. Next question was, what are stereotype annotations? There are various stereotype annotations that are available, right? Like controller, service, repositories. So they can tell like, can we replace it with any of one of them? Like these are actually the part of component only. So each and every stereotype annotations will be making use of component. So you can replace them with component. Okay, it will not throw any kind of errors or exceptions, but it will not behave normally. For service, you can replace it with component or repository controller. It will not create much issue, but it will create issue for controller. So whenever you will replace controller with component or service or repository, so it will not be able to find out the actual endpoint, where that actual endpoint is lying, where we have to exactly hit the request. So it will not be able to find that endpoint if we are changing the controller with any other type of annotations. And for repository, it is specific to database related operations. So if there is any exceptions coming at the database level, so that it will not be able to handle if we are replacing repository with any other type of stereotype annotations. So these type of questions can also be asked. Okay, so you should be prepared for that. Next was, what is Spring Boot starter parent? So Spring Boot starter parent, you are putting it at the top in the pom.xml, right? Spring Boot starter parent and the version you are putting for that. So what's the importance of that? So Basically, Spring Boot starter parent, it actually checks like your Java versions, your Maven versions, and all the dependencies versions are in sync or not, which is being put in pom.xml. There are various starter dependencies you are putting. So, and there are multiple other type of dependencies for databases, for JPAs, for other types you are putting all the dependencies in pom.xml, right? So all those versions are in sync or not, that also it will be checking Spring Boot starter parent. So it's a very important starter parent dependency. So you should be knowing about this. Okay. Then what is Spring Boot application? So this is actually the initial point or starting point when you will turn on the server or Tomcat server. Okay. So it will be having configuration, enable auto configuration component scan. So then they can ask you questions on that, like what is auto configuration feature? Okay, so that you should be prepared with, like it automatically configures all the dependencies in your class path, and you don't have to manually go and configure for all the dependencies that you are putting it. Okay, so that's why you will not have to focus upon only configuration part much. Rather, your main focus will be on writing the business logic. So that way you have to answer your question. Okay, so this is the thing that was asked to me. Next was difference between JPA, paging and sorting repository, and CRUD repository. If you see the hierarchy structure, there are various type of repositories coming, right? So at the the below part will be what? The below part will be CRUD repository, then there will be paging and sorting repository, then there will be JPA repository, and then there will be the main repository. So these are the hierarchical structure which generally these repository layers follow. So there are specific kind of methods that are present only in JPA, which will not be present in paging and sorting or CRUD. Okay, CRUD will support only CRUD operations. Paging and sorting will support all the CRUD operations. Along with that, it will support paging and sorting kind of thing, like in one page, how many requests will come, those all things it will support. And JPA will support some batch related operations along with all the methods present in paging and sorting as well as CRUD repository. And the repository interface is a top level interface which consists of all these methods, because it is the super class for all these interfaces. So that way you can understand. Okay. Then what are solid principles? You have to explain each and every solid principles. And most important one is which one? Liskov substitution principle. So this one is very important. Along with the real-time example, you can explain. Okay. And open close principle also they can ask you, like how will you implement open close principle? So these O and L are very, very important. Interface segregation is also important. All you should prepare with real-time example. I've already created video on solid principle with real-time example. You can follow that my video as well. Okay. Next is what are the scopes? There are various type of scopes in Spring Boot, like request, session, global session. Okay, so those all things you can explain. Okay, and how to make a custom immutable class. So this is also very much important. Okay, how will you create your custom immutable class? I think you will be knowing for that. It should have a deep copy. Okay, a class should be final so that nobody can inherit it. Then all the field members should be private and final. Okay, and all the mutable fields should be kept as final first so that it can't be mutated. And there should be a clone method from the get methods. Okay, and what is shallow copy, what is deep copy? That is the next question. Like what's the difference between shallow copy and deep copy, when to use what? That you should be very much aware of it. So shallow copies and deep copy difference is very important. It will be the next question after immutable class question. So we should be knowing about this. Okay, next is any behavioral design pattern that you have worked with. So there are various behavioral design pattern, like template design pattern, strategy design pattern. So you can explain any one of them. I've already created a video on strategy design pattern. You can follow that. And they will ask you at last. Once they will ask all about creational design pattern, then they will focus upon structural or behavioral design pattern. So two design pattern you should be knowing about all. Okay, so creational, every design pattern are important in creational, and structural and behavioral, 2 to 3 design patterns. If you are going good with at least a theory part, it will be of very much help to you. Okay, next will be what are distributed transactions. So transactions are distributed across all the microservices, right? So that it will create a consistency across services, and there will be the event that will be triggered, like success event or failure event, and based upon that it will send the response to another microservice. So what's the importance of that, and what is Saga design pattern, and within Saga there is choreography and orchestration, how does it work? So those all things you should be understanding it. Okay, so go ahead and try to understand Saga design pattern. It's very much important. Okay, then have you worked upon cloud technologies or not? So if you have worked upon cloud technologies, you can tell like, yes, I have worked with GCP or AWS or any cloud design cloud have you worked with for deployment purpose, so that you can tell. Okay, What are the advantages of monolithic application? So monolithic application is very much well used when the application is very small, okay, where there is not much functionality, is not much microservice interaction is required. So in that scenarios, monolithic application is preferred, because here debugging becomes very easy, understanding application becomes very easy, and handling also becomes very easy. Okay, so as soon as you scale it up with more and more microservices, so maintaining it becomes much more difficult. Okay, so always and always go for monolithic application until and unless it's required to make use of microservice. Okay, when there is, so you can see like lots of services are there, lots of functionalities are there, and we need to create microservices to interact with each other, then we should go for microservices. Okay, how are you made use of Kibana? So for tracing the logs, okay, for seeing like what all issues are coming in your project. So Kibana is the best tool where you can see all the logs with dates, and along with the tracing part, those things, and there will be a distributed section will be there for logging purpose. Okay, so how will you handle the loggings? Okay, and at the centralized level, so how will you make use of logging mechanism for that? That also you have to go through it. Okay, so this is a thing. If you want me to make video on this, you can just comment it down below. I will make video on that as well. What is circuit breaker design pattern? So it is basically a design pattern to make your microservice fault tolerant. Okay, so it will increase the resilience basically. Okay, so you have to implement it by having a dependency for circuit breaker. Okay, you have to add the dependency for circuit breaker, and you have to import a library from Spring Cloud, and then you can start implementing your circuit breaker with the number of retry attempts. So this is the way. And there are multiple states like open state, closed state, half open state. Okay, so I try to go through all these states of circuit breaker design pattern. This is very much important. So next question will be that only. What is half open? Okay, so if there are like 7 requests, and first it will allow for 2 to 3 requests to check like whether response we are getting or not. If we are getting the response, then the circuit will be going to close state. So that is half open. So that you have to go through it. This is very much important for interview perspective. Okay, so that was it. I hope you got a clarity, like what all things you have to work upon. And this, there are a lot of questions, 30 plus questions that has been asked to me in this interview. So understand it and implement it. Okay, so one question based upon mapping, Hibernate mapping also has been asked, like if one cart is having many books, if customer will try to purchase one of the book of any amount, how will you do that? Like if you want to find a book by name, how will you do that? So it's a kind of mapping kind of question, like one to many mapping. So one customer can have n number of books. So you will have to map. You have to create book entity, you have to create a customer entity, and within customer, you need to have one to many annotation, and you have to link list of books within customer class. And then you have to write a logic. So how will you do that? So those all things we have to implement it. So I think you have got the idea, like how can you implement it by yourself. So go ahead and implement this particular requirement. Okay, so I hope you got the clarity on this, like what all set of questions that are very important that has been asked to me in an interview. And also go with transactions like propagation level, isolation levels. These are also very important for interviews. And stream based questions also, you should go through it. Okay, in this particular interview it was not asked, but it is very much important to go through all the stream based questions that I have already prepared before, like 21 coding question in 21 minutes. You should go through that. So this was it. So I will see you in the next video with the next set of concepts. Till then, it's Dave Sutrai signing off. Bye bye.